Before human beings ever feared raging waves or trembled under skies swallowed by darkness, there was a moment that human history almost completely forgot. It was the moment when Allah chose an ordinary human being with a pure heart and unshakable determination to stand in front of a city so wealthy that its lights seemed to drown out the very truth itself. From that single moment, one of the most powerful stories of the prophets began. A story that, if you listen to it with a truly open heart, will change the way you look at the world, at trials, and even at your own self. The city of Nineveh in the time of Prophet Yunus was not some ruined, uncivilized land. On the contrary, it was one of the prides of humanity at that time. Huge white walls gleamed in the sun, straight avenues connected bustling public squares, and the markets were packed with precious goods brought from every corner of the world. It was the kind of city where anyone who set foot there would think that its people were living the perfect life. But what the eyes could not see was exactly what was killing them. Beneath all that luxury was a terrifying emptiness. They forgot Allah. They treated lifeless stone idols as gods. They lived in a state of self-satisfaction so deep that they could not recognize that the truth was drawing near. Allah did not send an angel down to be their messenger. He sent a human being, a man whose heart was sensitive enough to hurt when he saw others go astray, and strong enough to stand in front of a fierce, arrogant city without fear. That was Yunus, the one who would later be known as Dhun Nun and Sahib al-Hut. He did not appear with the image of a king or a warrior, but with the simplicity of someone who only wanted to save the souls of others before it was too late. When Yunus entered Nineveh, he saw something that other people never paid attention to. Their prosperity was not a sign of blessing. It was a heavy test that they had already failed. The people of Nineveh had everything except humility. They had wealth, power, and knowledge, but they did not have faith. That emptiness inside them made the words of Yunus, no matter how heartfelt, feel to them like nothing more than the wind passing by. For a prophet, the real pain is not in being insulted or rejected. The real pain is watching a people rushing straight toward a cliff while still laughing. Yunus felt that pain in every cold look they gave him. But the important thing is, he did not give up. He did not walk away. Day after day, month after month, he stood in the main square of Nineveh and repeated one simple truth: only Allah is worthy of worship. Many people think that prophets are always strong, always calm, always perfectly composed in every trial. But the story of Yunus proves the opposite. A prophet also has a heart. A prophet also feels hurt. A prophet also has moments when the weight of disappointment is so heavy that he feels like falling to his knees. And right there in Nineveh, the heart of Yunus faced this test in the most relentless way. A city flooded with light, yet drowned in darkness. A prophet chosen by Allah, yet standing alone in front of thousands of arrogant people. A mission that seemed impossible, but carried such great meaning that Allah placed the entire test of Yunus upon that very mission. If you think this is just a story about one man trying to preach, then you are mistaken. This is a story about the arrogance of human beings, and about how Allah tests the hearts of those He chooses. It is a story whose next chapter you would never be able to predict, because everything that happened after that moment, from the day Yunus left Nineveh, to the darkness inside the belly of the fish, to the supplication that saved his entire life, are events so incredible that no one would believe them if they were not mentioned in the Quran. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained. Subscribe to the channel to support us and give us more motivation to continue creating future videos, because the next part of this story will not only surprise you, it will also make you look back at yourself in the weakest moments of your journey of faith. 40 years is not a short period for any human being, but for a prophet who carries on his shoulders the mission of guiding an entire nation back to Allah. It is an endless journey, a test that only hearts nourished by faith can endure. Prophet Yunus stepped into that journey with a burning hope, the hope that one day the people of Nineveh would recognize the truth, remove the veil of arrogance covering their hearts, and return to their Creator. But with every passing day, that hope was worn down by their stubbornness, a stubbornness so strong that even the most truthful words became meaningless to ears that were tightly closed by pride. For 4 decades, Yunus was so steadfast that anyone who saw him would have thought that no ordinary person could ever be that patient. He spent days standing in the main square, explaining the oneness of Allah. He spent days going from house to house, gently advising people who were used to living inside the illusion of power. He spent days standing in front of groups who were busy arguing about who among them was richer, stronger, or had more gods protecting them. Every time he tried to remind them that what they were proud of was only an empty shadow, and that the truth had been abandoned long ago. Instead of listening, the people of Nineveh chose to respond with mockery and indifference. Some treated him as an annoyance, some laughed at his warnings, some even cursed him as if he were a threat to the prosperity of their city. The most painful part was that even those who sometimes felt a moment of doubt, a brief flash of fear, quickly returned to their old habits, because they did not want to trade their self-satisfaction for faith. The heart of Yunus remained firm, but the human body is not made of stone. He was a prophet, but he was also a human being who could be hurt. He looked into their empty eyes, their mocking smiles, their cold, dismissive gestures, and at times he wondered whether his words were too weak, or whether their hearts had been closed off for far too long. That weight clung to him like a shadow that refused to leave. Then one day, when his words could no longer reach a single heart, the emotions that had been building up for 40 years broke loose like a sudden flood. Yunus looked at people drowning in sin while still laughing. He looked at children imitating the arrogance of their parents. He looked at families worshiping lifeless idols and teaching each other that those idols were real power. His heart shattered into pieces. He was not angry at them because they insulted him. He was angry because they were losing their own souls. In that moment, Yunus spoke a warning that would become the turning point of this entire story. He warned them that if they did not repent within 40 days, the punishment of Allah would fall upon them. That was not a curse. It was the final cry for help from a prophet to his people. But the people of Nineveh still did not change. They looked at his warning the way one might look at a harmless cloud drifting across the sky. When Yunus left Nineveh, he did not leave as a coward running away. He left as a man who had poured every part of his heart and strength into saving a nation, only to receive coldness in return. The only difference, and the one thing that would turn his journey into something deeply painful, was that he left before Allah gave him permission to do so. That moment, small as a breath, was for a prophet, the thin line between patience and stumbling. No one knew how deeply the crowds of Nineveh had hurt the heart of Yunus. No one knew how many nights he had begged Allah to guide them. No one knew that behind his decision to leave, which looked so simple from the outside, was a chain of events that would push him into one of the harshest trials any prophet had ever faced in human history. The journey of Yunus did not end there. It had only just begun. When a prophet leaves his people in a state of despair, Allah opens for him a path in which every step carries a meaning far greater than he could have ever imagined. From that moment on, the story of the man who had preached for 40 years and received nothing but coldness would turn sharply in a direction no one could have expected. When Prophet Yunus walked out through the gates of Nineveh, he had no idea that behind him something was beginning that had never happened before in human history. His warning, which they had mocked, suddenly turned into an obsession as the sky began to change color. Thick black clouds twisted together, heavy and low, so low that people felt as if the sky itself was about to collapse. Hot winds swept through the white stone streets, turning the usually noisy city into a giant silent block of stone. No one said a word, but everyone felt the same truth. The words they once called madness had been pure reality all along. Then something extraordinary happened. After Yunus had already left, the people of Nineveh began to look at one another with terrified eyes. Those who once laughed now trembled. Those who had taken pride in their idols now saw them as nothing more than useless rocks. The wave of fear spread faster than any storm, until the entire city was sobbing in regret. They smashed the stone idols that had stood in their central squares. They fell to the ground and cried until their voices broke. Many of them, for the first time in their lives, truly understood what it meant to beg a Most High Being who could actually hear them. Nineveh fell into a kind of stillness that it had never known before. In that moment, Allah accepted their sincere repentance. The punishment was lifted. The sky slowly returned to normal. The wind softened, and the city was saved. It was a salvation that had never before been granted to a nation and has never been repeated a second time in history. But while Nineveh was experiencing forgiveness, Prophet Yunus was stepping into a chain of tragedies that no ordinary heart could bear. He and his wife and 2 children moved far away from the city. It was not an escape from Nineveh. It was an escape from the humiliation that only a messenger could truly understand. He was afraid that if the punishment was lifted from the people of Nineveh, they would accuse him of lying. According to the custom of that time, someone labeled a liar could be punished by death. When the family of Yunus reached the bank of a river, the water was not very deep, but the current was strong. He had no choice but to bring his family across. There was no boat, no rope, only his bare hands and their desperate urgency. Halfway through the river, disaster struck. Yunus slipped. His wife's hand slipped from his. The little child fell from his shoulders. In a single moment, a moment he would carry inside him for the rest of his life, the people he loved most were swept away by the water as if they had never existed. He struggled and reached out, but the current was stronger than his pleas. Before he could understand what was happening, he heard a scream from his older child, still standing on the riverbank. When he turned back, he saw a striped yellow shape flashing through the bushes, a tiger that had seized the boy and vanished into the forest. With nothing left to hold on to, Yunus stood there, soaked, shaking in a despair that no words could describe. A prophet who had been patient for 40 years now stood as powerless as a man who had lost everything. In that pain, he understood that there was no place for him to return to. He followed his instincts toward a faraway harbor where a ship was preparing to sail. People noticed the desperation in his eyes and, without many questions, allowed him to board. But as soon as the ship left the shore, the sea that had been calm suddenly turned wild. The wind screamed past their ears. Waves rose like towering walls. The night sky turned as black as ink. Even the most seasoned sailors trembled. They believed in an ancient belief that when there was someone on board who had angered the divine, the sea would not leave them alone. To find that person, they drew lots. The name of Yunus came up. They drew again. It was still Yunus. They drew a third time. Once again, Yunus. No one said anything. Everyone understood that this was no coincidence. Yunus understood it too. This was a reminder that Allah was sending him, not through words, but through the sheer power of nature. Yunus walked toward the edge of the ship. He knew he had no choice but to surrender himself to the sea. He threw himself into the storm. Before his body could even sink, the ocean revealed something more terrifying than the waves, the dark shape of an enormous fish. In a heartbeat, It swallowed him whole. There was no scream, no flash of light. Only thick darkness remained, a darkness from which the story of Prophet Yunus would enter its most miraculous phase. The darkness that Prophet Yunus fell into was unlike any darkness that human beings had ever experienced. It was not just the absence of light. It was a deep stillness in which every sound of the world seemed to be swallowed. As his body sank, the sea became a closed door that shut out every hope of escape. Then, without warning, a force of immense power pulled him into the giant mouth of a creature of the deep, a fish specially prepared by Allah for this test. There was no hysterical screaming, no frantic thrashing. Everything happened in a moment, so quick that the human mind could barely grasp it. Inside the belly of the fish, the darkness was so thick, it felt like it could crush his breath. There was no direction, no sense of time, no sign of life except for the faint beating of his own heart. Years of calling people to faith, years of facing trial after trial with patience, all of it was now reduced to one thing: absolute loneliness. In that moment when any other human being would have lost all hope, Prophet Yunus discovered a truth that only hearts that have truly broken can touch. He realized that he was not alone at all. When Yunus tried to listen carefully, he began to hear faint sounds around him. At first it was the sound of water pressing in from all sides, then the rhythmic movement within the body of the fish. But then, amidst those sounds, he heard something entirely different. He heard glorification, words of praise to Allah, coming from the sea creatures that his eyes could not see. Every creature was praising the Creator in its own way, and in that deep world, he felt clearly that everything around him was living in complete submission. Except human beings, who were often hesitant, doubtful, and rebellious. That realization struck directly at his heart. Yunus understood that this trial was not a punishment meant to destroy him. It was an invitation to return. Allah had not abandoned him. Allah was purifying him with a loneliness that no other test could ever match. When that truth soaked into his soul, from the deepest part of his being, Yunus raised a supplication that millions of people would recite whenever they fall into despair. La ilaha anta, subhanaka, inni kuntu minaz zalimin. There is no deity worthy of worship except you. You are absolutely perfect. I am truly among those who have done wrong. This was not an ordinary supplication. It was a complete acknowledgement that all power belongs to Allah alone, and that a human being only has true worth when he bows down in absolute humility. Every word he spoke echoed through that tight space, as if it were piercing through layer after layer of seawater, rising straight up to the sky with nothing able to block it. At that very moment, the angels heard his supplication. They knew the voices of all creatures that praise Allah, but the voice of Yunus carried a mixture of pain and trust so deep that it made them pause. They said to Allah that there was a very familiar voice calling out, not from the shore, not from the land, but from the depths of the ocean. Allah answered that this was the supplication of Yunus, a devoted servant who was going through the lesson of returning. Allah accepted his supplication, not because Yunus was a prophet, but because that prayer came from the most truthful place in his heart. It was the heart of someone who had been exhausted, angry, and had stumbled, but now overflowed with sincerity. When a heart empties itself of pride, it becomes the purest vessel for the light of Allah. The great fish received the command to bring Yunus back to the shore. It swam through cold layers of water, silently heading toward the place where light reached down through the surface. When it opened its mouth and released Yunus, his body collapsed onto the burning hot sand. He was so exhausted that he could not move. His skin, after so many days inside the fish, had become so fragile that even a strong breeze could cause him pain. The sun scorched down as if it wanted to blur his sight. Then, as a sign of Allah's limitless mercy, right beside where he lay, the earth split open and a plant began to grow quickly. Its leaves spread wide like protective arms, drooping down to form a cool canopy over him. Its fruit was soft, filled with water, and gently sweet, enough to gradually restore his broken body. He opened his eyes, looked up at that tree, and immediately understood that Allah had not only saved him from death, Allah had also saved him from the weakness inside his own soul. During the days he recovered under the shade of that tree, Yunus realized that rescue does not only come through huge miracles, it also comes through small, tender signs that overflow with love. When he finally stood up, his body strong enough to move again, Allah opened the next chapter of his story with a new command: to return to Nineveh, where another miracle was waiting. As Prophet Yunus recovered under the tree that Allah had given him, his body slowly regained its strength, but his heart still carried a deep ache that was hard to describe. He had experienced the deepest darkness of the ocean, tasted absolute loneliness, and then been saved by a miracle beyond imagination. It all felt like a cycle of pain and mercy, so that every breath he took reminded him of how small he was compared to the one who had brought him back to the light. When he finally stood up, strong enough to walk, the command of Allah rose within his heart once again: return to Nineveh. The road back to that city felt longer than any distance he had ever walked in his life. Not because of geography, but because every step reminded him of what he had been through. The river, where he lost his wife and children. The forest, where his eldest son had been dragged away by a wild animal. Each memory hit his heart like wave after wave. This time, however, Yunus did not bow his head and run away from pain. He let the pain walk with him as a part of the plan that Allah had written for him even before he was born. On that road of painful memories, a miracle took place. He heard a small voice calling him, trembling but familiar. When he turned around, he saw 3 figures running toward him. In that moment, it felt as if time stopped. It was his wife, his little child, and his older son, all still alive. Their faces were dirty, their clothes torn from everything they had gone through, but their eyes were bright with life. They threw their arms around him as if they were afraid that if they let go, he would disappear again. Through their tears, they told him every detail of how Allah had saved them, how people had pulled his wife and younger child from the river, and how the villagers had banded together to drive away the beast and heal his older son's wounds. All of it was a series of miracles arranged by Allah to soothe the heart of Yunus before he faced an even greater mission. When the 4 of them continued their journey together, every step felt lighter. Now he knew that the trials Allah places on his servants are never meant to destroy them. They are meant to make them more open-hearted, deeper in understanding, and stronger in the face of every storm of life. When Prophet Yunus finally returned to Nineveh, he did not know what was waiting for him. He had once feared that they would treat him as a liar. He had thought that his return would only bring humiliation. What actually happened left him standing speechless. It was not anger. It was not contempt. It was a sea of people running toward him, as if they were afraid that he might disappear again. They surrounded him with tears, with shivering apologies, with confessions so sincere that they would soften any heart. They told him that when the sky turned black and they felt punishment closing in on them, they remembered his words. They remembered his mercy toward them. In that terrifying fear, they finally faced the truth they had been avoiding for so long. Yunus looked at them, the same people who had once mocked him and stood before him with arrogance, now bowing their heads in gratitude. He understood that Allah had not only saved a prophet in the depths of the sea, Allah had also saved an entire people from destruction. Their sincere repentance had opened a wide gate, a path for the light of faith to enter. From that day on, Prophet Yunus guided the people of Nineveh with a heart more humble than ever before. There was no more harshness. There was no more despair. There was a deep understanding that every heart is capable of changing if it is awakened at the right time. Allah had done that in a way no one expected, through storms, darkness, a giant fish, and a supplication that rose from the deepest place of loneliness. The people of Nineveh, more than 100,000 souls, lived for many years in blessing because they truly returned to Allah. They became living proof of a timeless reality. There is no despair greater than the mercy of Allah, and there is no sin that sincere repentance cannot erase. The story of Yunus pierces straight into our hearts like a mirror reflecting the true human condition. We can stumble, we can be angry, we can make mistakes. But when we stand up again with humility, Allah raises us in ways that no one could ever predict. In that return, a prophet is purified, a people are saved, and the faith of humanity is strengthened all the way to this very day. The deepest lesson of this story is that every person has a darkness of the fish's belly in his or her life. It may be failure, loss, or those moments when we fall into despair that feels impossible to escape. Yet, it is in those exact moments that the most sincere prayer arises. We must learn to admit our faults like Yunus did. We must learn to completely entrust ourselves to Allah. We must learn to stand up again when He gives us a second chance. Applied to our lives today, this means training our hearts to be humble, learning to forgive ourselves after we fall, and being patient with the trials that Allah places on each of us. More importantly, we must hold tightly to the belief that no darkness lasts forever, as long as we still remember the one who created the light. If you want to continue exploring stories like this, stories that open new perspectives on faith, on trials, and on the mercy of Allah, then join the Prophetic History Explained community. There you will receive more valuable knowledge about the history of the prophets, the deep lessons in the Quran, and humanity's journey of faith. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so that we have more motivation to create future videos, bringing you stories that touch the heart and awaken the soul.